At the cemetery, he threw divorce papers at me. Sign it. I need a rich wife, not a burden. He left unaware I had just inherited $500 million. That single word, burden, would cost him everything he ever wanted.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The papers landed on Aunt Dorothy's grave. Fresh dirt, still soft from the burial 3 hours earlier. I watched them flutter against the temporary marker. Crisp white legal documents against brown Kentucky soil. Keith didn't even wait for me to pick them up. He walked back to the car. His car, the BMW I'd helped pay for with 20 years of teaching high school English. Sign them by Friday, he called over his shoulder. My lawyer needs them before the weekend. I stood there in my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 6 years ago. It still fit. Some things don't change. I bent down and gathered the papers, careful not to let them touch the dirt. Page 1, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Page 7, Asset Division. Page 12, his signature, already there, bold and impatient, 32 years. That's how long I'd been married to Keith Powell. I was 26 when we met at a real estate conference in Lexington. He was charming then, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and pulled out chairs. I was finishing my teaching degree, working part-time as a receptionist at a property management company. He told me I was too smart to answer phones. He said I deserved better. What he meant was that he deserved better. Someone to cook his meals, iron his shirts, attend his open houses with a smile. Someone to give up her career when the first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and he decided I was too fragile to work. Someone to try again and again, until Olivia finally arrived and I never went back to teaching. I looked at the grave marker, Dorothy Mae Foster, 1942, 2024, beloved aunt. She would have had something to say about this. Dorothy always had something to say. She never married, never had children, spent 40 years working as a secretary at a stock brokerage in Louisville. Everyone in the family thought she was just a spinster who got lucky with a small pension. Nobody visited her except me. Every Sunday for 15 years, I drove 45 minutes to her apartment in St. Matthews. Keith complained about the gas money. He said she wasn't even my real aunt, just my mother's cousin. And what was the point? The point was that Dorothy remembered my birthday when my own husband forgot. The point was that she asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. The point was that she was the only person in my life who looked at me and saw Nancy, not Keith Powell's wife. She died on a Tuesday. Pneumonia, they said. Though she'd been healthy enough to beat me at Scrabble the Sunday before, I found her in her recliner, still holding the TV remote, a half-finished crossword puzzle on her lap. 7 across. Betrayal in the family. 8 letters. I never did figure out the answer. Keith didn't come to the hospital. He didn't come to the funeral home. He showed up at the cemetery 40 minutes late, checked his phone twice during the service, and waited until the last mourner left to hand me the divorce papers. "I've been patient," he said, like he was explaining something to a slow child. "But Melissa and I want to move forward." Melissa. I'd known about her for 6 months. The texts he forgot to delete, the late nights at showings that never appeared on his calendar, the perfume on his collar that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Melissa Warren, 34 years old, sells luxury condos in the Highlands. I'd seen her photo on the company website. Blonde hair, white teeth, the kind of confidence that comes from never having sacrificed anything for anyone. "Melissa," I repeated. "Don't make this ugly, Nancy." He loosened his tie, impatient. "You can have the house. I don't care about the house. Just sign the papers and we can both move on with our lives." The house. Our house. The one I'd decorated room by room over 3 decades. The one where I'd raised Olivia, hosted Thanksgiving dinners, planted roses in the backyard. The one that was worth maybe $400,000 in this market, with a $180,000 mortgage still attached. "What about Olivia?" I asked. "Olivia understands. She wants what's best for both of us." That was a lie. Olivia hadn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. She'd taken her father's side without hearing mine, cut me off mid-sentence when I tried to explain. "Dad told me everything," she'd said. "How you let yourself go. How you stopped trying. How you made him feel invisible in his own home. Invisible. Keith Powell, the man who demanded dinner on the table at 6:30 every night, the man who needed his shirts starched just so, his coffee at exactly the right temperature, his ego stroked after every minor professional setback, the man who hadn't asked me a single question about my day in probably 15 years. That man felt invisible. I watched him walk away now, his leather shoes leaving prints in the cemetery grass. He didn't look back. He never looked back. The BMW started with a purr, pulled out of the gravel lot, and disappeared down Bardstown Road. I was alone with my dead aunt and a stack of divorce papers. The wind picked up. March in Kentucky is unpredictable. Warm one day and freezing the next. Today it couldn't decide. I pulled my coat tighter and sat down on the metal folding chair the funeral home had left behind. The other mourners, what few there were, had taken the shuttle back to the church for the reception. I told them I needed a moment. I needed more than a moment. I needed to understand how I'd gotten here. 58 years old, no job, no savings of my own, a daughter who wouldn't take my calls, and a husband who'd traded me in for a newer model like I was one of his used cars. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Foster, this is Helen Morris from Whitfield & Associates. Please call me at your earliest convenience regarding Dorothy Foster's estate. It's urgent. Estate. Dorothy's estate." I almost laughed. Dorothy lived in a one-bedroom apartment with furniture from the 1970s. Her estate was probably a collection of Reader's Digest magazines and a savings account with enough to cover the funeral costs. I'd deal with it tomorrow. Today, I had to figure out how to get home. Keith had driven me to the cemetery. Keith had left me here without a second thought. I could call a cab, but my purse was in his car. My phone was at 12% battery. The nearest bus stop was a mile away, and I was wearing heels. I started walking. 45 minutes later, I reached my house. Our house. The porch light was off, which was strange because I always left it on. The front door was unlocked, which was stranger still. I stepped inside and knew immediately that something was wrong. The living room was half empty. The leather sofa Keith had insisted on buying 3 years ago, gone. The flat-screen TV, gone. The antique sideboard my grandmother had left me, gone. In their place, clean rectangles on the carpet where furniture used to be, and dust outlines on the walls where pictures used to hang. I walked through the house like a ghost. The dining room table, gone. The china cabinet, gone. The bedroom set Keith had never liked because I'd picked it out, still there, but his closet was empty. His bathroom shelf was bare. His nightstand drawer hung open, cleared of everything except a single photograph. I picked it up. Our wedding day, 1992. I was smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Keith looked like he'd won the lottery. We were standing outside the church in Lexington, rice still in my hair, the whole future spread out before us like a promise. I turned it over. On the back, in Keith's handwriting, the beginning of my mistake. I sat down on the bed we'd shared for 32 years and didn't move for a very long time. The sun set. The room went dark. My phone died. Somewhere around midnight, I heard a car pull into the driveway, saw headlights sweep across the window, and then nothing. Just silence, and the weight of understanding that everything I'd built had been taken from me in a single afternoon. On the nightstand, my eyes adjusted to see the divorce papers I'd carried home. Underneath them, barely visible in the dark, was the business card that must have fallen from my pocket. Helen Morris, attorney at law, Whitfield & Associates. It's urgent. I reached for it with trembling fingers, wondering what kind of urgency a dead woman's estate could possibly hold. The furniture truck came back at 7 a.m., not to return what Keith had taken, but to take more. I watched from the kitchen window, still in yesterday's funeral dress, as 2 men loaded the patio furniture into a white van. The wrought iron set I'd bought at an estate sale 12 years ago. The umbrella that had faded from green to something closer to gray. The terracotta pots I'd planted with herbs every spring. Keith wasn't there. He'd sent workers to do what he wouldn't do himself. That was Keith, always delegating the uncomfortable parts. I found my spare phone charger in the junk drawer and plugged in my cell. 14 missed calls, 11 from numbers I didn't recognize. 2 from my sister Barbara in Frankfurt, 1 from Olivia. I called Olivia first. "Mom." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "Dad told me you'd call. Honey, I don't understand what's happening. He took the furniture. He left me at the cemetery. He said you'd try to make him look bad." She sighed, the same sigh Keith used when I asked too many questions. "Look, I don't want to be in the middle of this. You two need to work it out like adults. Olivia, I'm your mother. And he's my father. And he's been nothing but honest with me about why this marriage failed. Maybe if you'd been honest too, we wouldn't be here." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, at my daughter's name on the screen, at the call duration, 47 seconds. That's how long it took to lose her. My sister called back within the hour. "Nancy, what is going on? Keith called me this morning. He said you're having some kind of breakdown." "A breakdown?" I almost laughed. "Barbara, he cleared out the house. He handed me divorce papers at Dorothy's funeral, at her grave." Silence on the other end. Then, "He said you've been difficult for months, that you refused counseling, that you've been spending money erratically." "Spending money? I haven't bought anything for myself in 3 years. I had to ask him for grocery money, Barbara. I had to justify every purchase over $50. That's not what he's telling people." People. The word hung there. Keith was already building his narrative, already painting me as the unstable wife who drove him away. By the time the divorce was final, everyone we knew would believe his version. That's what he did. That's what he'd always done. I looked at the business card still clutched in my hand. Helen Morris, Whitfield and Associates. "Barbara, I have to go." "Nancy, wait. If you need money, I'll call you later." I hung up before she could offer me something I'd have to refuse. Pride is a strange thing. It survives even when everything else is gone. The law office was downtown, in one of those old buildings on West Main that had been converted from warehouses to professional suites. I took the bus, paid with quarters I found in a coat pocket, and arrived 20 minutes early. The receptionist offered me coffee. I accepted, more for something to hold than anything to drink. Helen Morris was not what I expected. Mid-50s, gray hair cut short, glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore a cardigan over a silk blouse and looked more like a librarian than a lawyer. Her handshake was firm. "Mrs. Foster, thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." I sat in the chair she indicated, noticed the tissues strategically placed on the corner of her desk. "I'm not sure why I'm here. Dorothy didn't have much. I assumed whatever she left would go to the church or the nursing home fund." Helen folded her hands. "Mrs. Foster, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. I want you to know that everything has been verified. Everything is legal, and everything is entirely yours." "What do you mean?" "Your Aunt Dorothy was my client for 23 years. I handled her investments, her trust, her estate planning. She was a very private woman. She didn't want anyone to know the extent of her holdings until after her death." "Holdings?" Helen opened a folder on her desk. "Dorothy Foster began investing in 1962 when she was 20 years old. Her first purchase was 100 shares of a small technology company in California. She bought more shares whenever she could, reinvested every dividend, and never sold a single stock. When that company went public in the 1980s, her holdings were worth approximately $4 million. I couldn't process the number. $4 million? That was 40 years ago, Mrs. Foster. The company continued to grow. Dorothy continued to hold. As of the market close yesterday, her portfolio is valued at approximately $512 million. The room tilted. I gripped the armrest of my chair. "That can't be right. I have the statements here." Helen slid a stack of papers across the desk. "Brokerage accounts, dividend records, tax returns. Your aunt lived off less than $40,000 a year and let the rest compound. She never married, never had children, and she named you as her sole beneficiary in 1987. She updated the will every 5 years to confirm her intentions. The last update was 6 months ago. I looked at the papers. Numbers that didn't make sense. Zeros that seemed to multiply the longer I stared. Why me? Helen smiled softly. She told me you were the only one who ever visited without wanting something. She said you brought her soup when she was sick and didn't tell anyone. She said you remembered that she liked lavender, not roses. She said you were the only person who saw her as Dorothy, not as someone's maiden aunt. The tears came before I could stop them. Dorothy, alone in her apartment with $500 million, eating soup I'd brought from the deli down the street. Dorothy, who'd listened to me complain about Keith for 15 years and never once said what she must have been thinking. Dorothy, who'd given me the only thing worth more than money, her attention. There's something else, Helen said. The inheritance is structured as individual property. Under Kentucky law, it belongs solely to you. It is not a marital asset. Even if you were still married, your husband would have no legal claim to any of it. I'm getting divorced. I know. I saw the filing this morning. Helen paused. Your husband's petition specifically requests total separation of assets. No commingling, no division of property acquired before or during the marriage. He believes this protects his business interests. And it does? It does. Helen leaned forward. It also means that this inheritance, which you received 1 week before the divorce petition was filed, is entirely protected. He cannot touch a single cent. He doesn't even have to be informed of its existence until the proceedings are complete. I thought about Keith in his BMW, driving away from Dorothy's grave. I thought about the furniture truck at 7 a.m., the empty rooms, the photograph with "my mistake" written on the back. I thought about Olivia, who wouldn't take my calls, and Barbara, who believed whatever Keith told her. What do I do now? Now? Helen closed the folder. Now you let me handle the paperwork. The funds will be transferred to accounts in your name within 10 business days. In the meantime, I suggest you find somewhere comfortable to stay and avoid discussing this with anyone. Your husband has requested an expedited divorce hearing. Given his petition terms, I see no reason to object. When is the hearing? 1 week from today. 1 week. 7 days until I sat across from Keith in a courtroom and listened to him explain why I deserved nothing. 7 days until he offered me pennies and expected gratitude. 7 days until I showed him exactly what his demands had cost him. I walked out of Helen's office into the spring sunshine. Louisville looked different now. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything had shifted. I was no longer Nancy Powell, the burden. I was Nancy Foster, and I had just inherited more money than Keith would earn in 100 lifetimes. My phone buzzed. A text from Keith. My lawyer says you haven't signed yet. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I deleted the message and kept walking. That night, I checked into the Brown Hotel downtown. Not the cheapest room, not the most expensive. Somewhere in between. I ordered room service for the first time in my life, sat by the window overlooking Broadway, and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. On the desk beside me, the divorce papers waited. Page 7, Asset Division, listed everything Keith believed we owned. The house, the cars, his retirement account, my modest IRA. The total came to roughly $800,000, of which he was generously offering me $150,000. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea. I picked up the hotel pen, found the signature line on page 12, and signed my name, Nancy Foster, not Powell. I'd taken his name 32 years ago and worn it like a costume. Now I was giving it back. Tomorrow, I would messenger the papers to his lawyer. I would accept his terms. I would let him think he'd won. And then I would wait. The Brown Hotel was too quiet. After 32 years of Keith snoring, the television he left on all night, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen I'd cleaned 10,000 times, the silence pressed against my ears like cotton. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I sat by the window and watched the hours pass like strangers on the street below. Day 2. Helen called with an update. The signed papers had been received. Keith's lawyer had expressed surprise at how quickly I'd agreed. He expected a fight, Helen said. He was prepared for a fight. Let him wonder. The hearing is still set for Friday. Judge Morrison, Family Court Division 3. I'll be there as your representative for the estate matters. But you'll need a divorce attorney for the proceedings themselves. I don't have a divorce attorney. You do now. I've contacted Patricia Webb. She's the best in the state and she owes me a favor. She'll meet you tomorrow at noon. Patricia Webb turned out to be 63 years old, with silver hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She'd been practicing family law for 40 years and had seen every trick in the book. So your husband thinks he's clever, she said, scanning the divorce petition. Total separation of assets. He's protecting his business from you. He sells houses. He sells houses and he has a girlfriend half his age who probably thinks she's getting a wealthy older man. Patricia snorted. What he doesn't know is that you're about to become the wealthiest woman in Jefferson County. He can't find out, not before Friday. He won't find out from me. But I need to ask you something, Mrs. Foster. She set down the papers. What do you want from this divorce? Beyond the obvious satisfaction of watching him realize his mistake, I'd thought about this for 2 days. Lying awake in the hotel room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every slight, every dismissal. Every time Keith had made me feel small, I could destroy him. I had the resources now to drag him through court for years, to contest every asset, to make his life as miserable as he'd made mine. But that wasn't what Dorothy would have wanted. Dorothy, who'd lived simply despite her wealth, who'd found joy in crossword puzzles and Sunday visits, who'd told me once that the best revenge was a life well lived. I want it to be over, I said. I want to walk away clean. I don't want his money or his house or his retirement account. I just want him to know that he made a mistake, a very expensive mistake. Patricia nodded slowly. And your daughter? That was the harder question. Olivia still wasn't taking my calls. I'd sent 3 texts, each one more desperate than the last. The silence was worse than anger. Anger meant she still cared. Silence meant I'd already lost her. My daughter made her choice. I can't force her to love me. But you can show her who you really are. Sometimes that takes time. I spent the rest of the week preparing. Helen walked me through the inheritance documents, explained the tax implications, helped me set up accounts that would keep the money safe and accessible. Patricia coached me on courtroom demeanor, calm, composed, no visible emotion. Let him be the one who loses his temper, she said. Men like Keith always do when things don't go their way. Thursday night, I couldn't stay in the hotel anymore. I took a cab to my old neighborhood, asked the driver to park across the street from the house. The lights were on. Keith's car was in the driveway. Beside it, a red convertible I didn't recognize. Melissa's, probably. I watched the windows for an hour. Shadows moving behind curtains. The flicker of the television I'd paid for with 20 years of silence. Once, I saw Keith walk past the living room window, a glass in his hand, laughing at something I couldn't hear. He looked happy. That was the worst part. He looked like a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Mom, it's Olivia. I'm using a friend's phone. Dad doesn't know I'm texting you. Can we talk? My hands shook as I typed back, of course, when? Not before the hearing. Dad's watching everything. But after. I want to hear your side. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust. But it was something. A crack in the wall she'd built between us. I'll be there for you whenever you're ready. I wrote. I love you. I never stopped. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No response came. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling. The kind of weather that made Louisville look tired. I dressed carefully. A navy blue suit I'd bought with cash at a department store downtown. Simple gold earrings Dorothy had given me for my 50th birthday. Low heels that wouldn't make me look like I was trying too hard. Patricia met me outside the courthouse. Helen was already inside, seated in the gallery with a briefcase full of documents I hoped we wouldn't need. Remember, Patricia said as we walked up the steps, he's going to try to provoke you. He'll say things about the marriage, about your contribution, about what you deserve. Don't react. Let him talk himself into a corner. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag drooping in the corner. Keith was already there, seated at the petitioner's table with his lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd graduated law school approximately 15 minutes ago. Keith didn't look at me when I entered. He was studying his phone, scrolling through something, performing disinterest. But I saw his jaw tighten when I sat down. I saw him glance at Patricia and frown. All rise. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses. She looked like someone's grandmother, the kind who made cookies and didn't tolerate nonsense. She scanned the papers in front of her, nodded to herself, and looked up. "We're here on the matter of Powell versus Powell, petition for dissolution of marriage. I see both parties are represented. Harmon, you filed the petition. Please proceed." Keith's lawyer stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward matter. My client and Mrs. Powell have been married for 32 years. The marriage has irretrievably broken down. My client has proposed a fair division of assets, which Mrs. Powell has accepted. We're asking the court to grant the dissolution and approve the asset division as submitted." "Mrs. Webb?" Patricia stood. "We have no objection to the dissolution, Your Honor. My client has signed the petition and accepts the proposed terms." Judge Morrison looked surprised. "No objection at all? The proposed division seems minimal. Powell would receive approximately 18% of the marital assets. My client is satisfied with the arrangement." Keith shifted in his seat. I could feel him looking at me now, trying to read my expression. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded on the table. "Very well," the judge said. "Is there anything else before I sign the decree?" Keith's lawyer hesitated. "Actually, Your Honor, there is the matter of spousal support. My client is prepared to offer a one-time payment of $50,000 in lieu of ongoing alimony. $50,000 for 32 years of marriage. For giving up my career, raising his daughter, managing his household, tolerating his affairs. $50,000. Patricia didn't blink. "My client declines." "Declines?" The lawyer looked confused. "She's refusing the money? She doesn't want it." Keith leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer. His face had changed. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like worry. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "my client would like to understand why Mrs. Powell is refusing support. Is she planning to contest the divorce?" "She's not contesting anything," Patricia said. "She simply doesn't need Mr. Powell's money." The silence in the courtroom stretched. Judge Morrison looked from Keith to me, curiosity flickering behind her glasses. "Mrs. Powell," she said, "is there anything you'd like to say before I finalize this decree?" I stood. My legs were steady. My voice was clear. "Only that I'm grateful for the court's time, Your Honor, and that I wish Mr. Powell well in his future endeavors." Keith stared at me. I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, the calculations he was making. Something was wrong. Something didn't add up. His wife of 32 years, the woman he'd called a burden, was walking away from everything without a fight. "Very well," Judge Morrison said. "The decree is granted. This marriage is dissolved." She signed the paper with a flourish. Keith's lawyer gathered his files. Keith himself sat frozen, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. I picked up my purse and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, Helen was waiting with a smile. "There's one more thing," I said. "The child support hearing. It's scheduled for this afternoon?" 2:00. Same judge. "Good." I checked my watch. "That gives me just enough time to get to the bank." What Keith didn't know was that the divorce was only the beginning. What he didn't know was that his petition for total separation of assets had just locked him out of $500 million. What he didn't know was that his burden was about to become the richest woman he'd ever walked away from. And what he really didn't know was that I was about to show him exactly what he'd lost. The bank manager's name was Robert Chen, and he'd never seen a deposit this large. I could tell by the way his hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the wire transfer confirmation. $512,147,329.16. $512 million. transferred from Dorothy's brokerage accounts into my new personal accounts at Commonwealth Trust. Mrs. Foster, he said, his voice carefully professional. I want to assure you that your funds are fully insured and protected. We've assigned you a dedicated wealth management team. If there's anything you need, anything at all, I need a certified bank statement. He blinked. Of course. For what purpose, if I may ask? Personal matter. The statement printed on heavy cream paper with the bank's watermark. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse alongside the divorce decree. 2 documents that would change everything. The child support hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Kentucky law required it whenever minor children were involved, but Olivia was 28. This hearing was about something else. Keith's attempt to establish that I had no income, no assets, no ability to support myself. He wanted the court to declare me financially dependent so he could control the narrative. Poor Nancy couldn't survive without him, had to accept whatever scraps he offered. Patricia met me in the courthouse lobby with a paper cup of coffee and a knowing smile. You look different, she said. I feel different. Good, because this afternoon is going to be memorable. The courtroom was the same one from this morning, but the atmosphere had shifted. Keith was pacing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice a harsh whisper I couldn't quite hear. His lawyer looked nervous, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. And in the gallery, a face I hadn't expected, Melissa Warren, the girlfriend, dressed in red like she was attending a cocktail party. She caught my eye and smirked. I remembered what Keith had said at the cemetery. I need a rich wife. That was what Melissa thought she was getting. A successful real estate man with a nice house and a comfortable retirement. She had no idea. All rise. Judge Morrison took her seat and reviewed the file. We're continuing with Powell versus Powell, the matter of financial support and asset verification. Harmon, you requested this hearing? Keith's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client wishes to establish Mrs. Powell's financial status for the record. Given that she declined spousal support this morning, we want to ensure she understands her situation and isn't making decisions under duress. Under duress. Patricia's voice was dry. My client signed the divorce papers of her own free will. She declined support because she doesn't need it. With respect, Harmon said, Mrs. Powell hasn't worked in over 20 years. She has no income, no pension, no independent assets. We're concerned that she may be confused about her circumstances. Confused. I heard myself laugh before I could stop it. The sound echoed in the quiet courtroom. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Powell, do you have something to add? Patricia put a hand on my arm, but I was already standing. Your Honor, I'm not confused. I'm actually seeing things clearly for the first time in 32 years. I reached into my purse and pulled out the bank statement. I'd like to submit this as evidence of my financial status. Objection, Harmon said automatically. We haven't seen this document. It's a bank statement, Your Honor, dated today, showing my current account balance. Judge Morrison held out her hand. I'll allow it. Let me see. I walked forward and handed her the paper. Watched her eyes move down the page. Watched them stop. Watched them go back to the top and start again. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. The judge removed her glasses, cleaned them on her robe, put them back on, and read the number a third time. Mrs. Powell, she said slowly, is this accurate? Yes, Your Honor. $512 million? Behind me, I heard Keith make a sound. Something between a gasp and a choke. I didn't turn around. Inherited from my Aunt Dorothy Foster, who passed away last week. The funds were transferred this morning. And this inheritance, it predates the divorce filing? By 4 days, Your Honor. My aunt died on Tuesday. My husband filed for divorce on Saturday. The inheritance was verified on Monday. And as Mr. Powell's own petition specified, all assets are to be kept completely separate. No commingling, no division. The judge looked at Keith. His face had gone gray. Melissa, in the gallery, was leaning forward with her mouth open. "Harmon," the judge said, "were you aware of this inheritance?" "No, Your Honor," his voice cracked. "My client wasn't informed." "Because there was no legal requirement to inform him." Patricia stood now, her voice carrying easily through the courtroom. "Mrs. Foster's inheritance is classified as individual property under Kentucky law. Powell's petition for total separation of assets ensures that he has no claim to any portion of it. He requested this arrangement himself." "I didn't know." Keith was on his feet, his composure shattered. "I didn't know she had money. This changes everything." "It changes nothing," Patricia said calmly. "The divorce was finalized this morning under the terms you proposed. The decree is signed. The assets are separated, exactly as you wanted." "That's not fair, Powell." Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. "You will control yourself in my courtroom." "She tricked me. She knew about this money and she didn't tell me." "She had no obligation to tell you. You made that clear in your own petition." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Powell, I have to ask, why did you accept his terms? You could have contested the divorce, demanded a larger settlement, made this much more difficult." I thought about Dorothy's apartment. The crossword puzzles, the lavender soap, the Sunday afternoons when she'd listen to me talk about Keith's latest cruelty, and never once say "I told you so," because I didn't want his money, Your Honor. I never wanted his money. I just wanted him to know what he gave up. The judge nodded slowly. She looked at Keith, still standing, his hands clenched at his sides. She looked at Melissa in the gallery, who was already gathering her purse. "This hearing is concluded. Powell, your petition for total separation of assets has been granted, exactly as you requested. Powell's inheritance remains her sole property. There are no grounds for reconsideration." She banged her gavel. The sound echoed like a door slamming shut. Keith pushed past his lawyer, stormed toward me. "You can't do this. We were married for 32 years. I have rights. You have exactly what you asked for," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less. I'll sue. I'll contest the will. I'll prove she was incompetent, that she was manipulated." Dorothy was sharper than both of us combined. She planned this for 30 years. Every document is airtight. Every signature is witnessed. You can spend the rest of your life in court, Keith, and you won't see a penny. His face twisted. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married, the charming salesman who'd convinced me I was lucky to have him. Then I saw something else, something desperate and ugly. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." I walked out of the courtroom, Patricia on one side, Helen on the other. Behind me, I heard Melissa's heels clicking rapidly toward the exit. I heard Keith calling her name. I heard a door slam. In the hallway, I stopped by a window overlooking the courthouse lawn. The rain had stopped. Sunlight was breaking through the clouds. "Well," Patricia said, "that was satisfying. Is he going to make trouble?" "He'll try. They always try. But Helen's right. The estate is bulletproof. Dorothy made sure of that." Helen handed me a folder. The rest of the paperwork: charitable foundations, investment accounts, property holdings. Dorothy wanted you to have options. Options. I'd never had options before. Every decision in my adult life had been filtered through Keith's approval, Keith's preferences, Keith's fragile ego. Now I had 500 million options, and no one to answer to but myself. My phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number as before. "Mom, I saw what happened. I was in the back of the courtroom. Can we meet? Tonight?" Olivia. She'd been there. She'd seen her father's face when he realized what he'd lost. She'd seen him turn on me, threaten me, call me a liar. She'd seen the truth. "Yes," I typed back. "Tell me where." The response came immediately. "Grandma Dorothy's apartment, 7 p.m. I have her key. I think we need to talk there." I stared at the message. Dorothy's apartment, where I'd spent 15 years of Sundays, where my daughter had never once visited, where everything had begun. 7 o'clock, I said aloud. Patricia looked at me. "Good news?" "I think so. I hope so." I put my phone away. I think my daughter is ready to hear my side of the story. Dorothy's apartment smelled like lavender and old books. The scent hit me the moment I opened the door, a wave of memory so strong it nearly knocked me backward. 15 years of Sundays. 15 years of tea and crossword puzzles and conversations that actually mattered. The furniture was still there. The velvet armchair where Dorothy always sat, the side table with the lamp she'd bought at a garage sale in 1978, the bookshelf crammed with paperbacks, their spines cracked from reading. Nothing had been touched since she died. Olivia was standing by the window, her back to me. She wore jeans and a sweater, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She looked like she had at 16, before Keith convinced her that ambition mattered more than kindness. "I didn't know you came here," she said without turning around. "Dad said Aunt Dorothy was boring, that she just sat around complaining about her health." Dorothy never complained about anything. She played Scrabble until the day she died, beat me by 40 points the Sunday before. Olivia turned. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" "Any of it. The money, the visits, the fact that you had a whole relationship with her that I never knew about." I set my purse down on Dorothy's coffee table, moved a stack of crossword puzzle books aside. "I tried to bring you here once. You were 14. You said you had better things to do." "I was 14. I didn't know anything." "And after that, your father made it clear that visiting Dorothy was my hobby, not a family obligation. He said she wasn't really our aunt, just a distant cousin. He said the drive was too long and the apartment was depressing." Olivia sat down on the armchair. Dorothy's armchair. She ran her fingers over the worn velvet. "He lied to me, Mom. About everything." "What did he tell you?" "He said you were cold. That you stopped loving him years ago. That you refused to go to counseling, refused to work on the marriage. He said you let yourself go, that you didn't care about keeping him happy." I sat on the sofa across from her. The same sofa where I'd cried on Dorothy's shoulder more times than I could count. "Your father had an affair with Melissa Warren for 3 years before he asked for the divorce. He emptied our joint accounts 2 weeks before he filed. He hired movers to take the furniture while I was at the funeral, and he handed me divorce papers at your great-aunt's grave, told me I was a burden, and drove away without looking back." Olivia's face crumpled. "He said you were exaggerating. He said you always made yourself the victim." "I'm not a victim, not anymore." "But you were, for years, and I didn't see it." "You saw what he wanted you to see. Keith is very good at that." The silence stretched between us. Through the window, I could see the lights of St. Matthew's coming on one by one. Dorothy had loved this view. She'd said it reminded her that life went on, even when yours felt like it was standing still. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Olivia's voice was small. "About why I believed him. About why I took his side." "You don't have to explain." "Yes, I do. Because I didn't just believe him. I helped him." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Olivia pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, handed it to me. It was a text conversation between her and Keith, dated 2 months ago. "Keith, your mother is unstable. I need documentation." Olivia, "What kind of documentation?" Keith, "Anything that makes her look erratic, forgetful, difficult." Olivia, "I can talk to Dr. Harrison, say I'm worried about early dementia." Keith, "Good girl. This will help both of us in the long run." I read the messages 3 times. Each time the words hit harder. "He was going to use this against you in court," Olivia whispered. "He was going to say you weren't mentally competent, that you couldn't manage your own affairs, that he needed to be appointed your guardian. Guardian. So he could control the house, the accounts, everything. He said it was for your own good. He said you'd thank him later." I handed the phone back. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd expected rage, betrayal, something dramatic. Instead, I felt a strange calm settling over me like snow. "Did you talk to Dr. Harrison?" "I made an appointment, but I canceled it the day of the funeral." She wiped her eyes. "I saw you at the grave, Mom." I saw your face when he drove away. And I realized I was about to help him destroy you. But you didn't. I didn't. But I almost did. And I need you to understand how sorry I am. How much I hate myself for even considering it. I reached across the space between us and took her hand. It was cold, trembling. You were manipulated by someone who's been manipulating people his whole life. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. How can you forgive me? Because you're my daughter. Because Dorothy would have told me that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And because I spent 32 years loving a man who didn't deserve it. I won't make the same mistake with you. Olivia broke down then. Deep, shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. I moved to the armchair, held her the way I'd held her when she was small, stroked her hair, and said nothing. Some wounds don't need words, they just need presence. When she finally quieted, the sky outside was fully dark. Dorothy's apartment glowed with lamplight, warm and amber, like something from another time. What happens now? Olivia asked. Now I figure out what to do with more money than I can possibly spend. Dorothy left me some ideas. Charitable foundations, scholarships, that kind of thing. And Dad? Your father made his choices. He wanted a total separation of assets. He got one. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Olivia sat up, wiped her face. He called me after the hearing. He was screaming, saying you'd cheated him, that you'd planned the whole thing. He wants me to testify that Aunt Dorothy was mentally incompetent when she wrote the will. Will you? No. Her voice was firm. I never even met Aunt Dorothy, but I know she wasn't incompetent. And I know Dad is only interested in money. He always has been. He's going to pressure you. Let him try. She looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Mom, I want to help you. With the foundations, with whatever you decide to do. I want to be part of something real for once. You have a job, your career. I work for Dad's real estate company. Or I did until about 3 hours ago. She smiled weakly. I quit, by text. He hasn't responded yet. I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. Dorothy would have liked you, I said. She always said you had potential, if you could just get out from under your father's shadow. You talked about me? Every Sunday. She asked about you more than she asked about Keith. She wanted to know if you were happy. I never knew what to tell her. Olivia looked around the apartment, at the books and the lamp and the armchair that still held the impression of Dorothy's body. I wish I'd come with you. Just once. You're here now. That counts for something. We sat in silence for a while, 2 women in a dead woman's apartment, sorting through the wreckage of a family that had never been what it seemed. Outside, a car alarm went off, then stopped. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Life went on. Mom? Olivia said finally. What did Aunt Dorothy see in you? Why did she leave you everything? I thought about the question. The real answer was complicated, layered with years of visits and conversations and small kindnesses that added up to something larger. She saw someone who showed up, I said. That's all. I showed up. Every Sunday, rain or shine. I didn't want anything from her except her company. And in the end, that was worth more than all the money in the world. Olivia nodded slowly. I want to be someone who shows up. Then start now. That's all any of us can do. She hugged me then, fierce and tight. I hugged her back and felt something broken begin to mend. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Dorothy Foster Community Center and watched the mayor cut the ribbon. It was a modest building by Louisville standards, 2 stories of red brick on the corner of Broadway and 6th, but it represented something larger. A shelter for women escaping abusive situations, a job training program, a legal clinic, a place where someone like me, 30 years ago, might have found the courage to leave sooner. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. I smiled for the photographers and shook hands with city council members and accepted congratulations from people whose names I immediately forgot. None of it felt real. What felt real was the building itself, the solid weight of it, The fact that Dorothy's money was finally being used for something that mattered. Helen stood beside me, a folder of paperwork under her arm. "The Foundation's first quarterly report," she said. "We've already funded 12 scholarships and 3 small business grants. The women's shelter is operating at capacity. Capacity is a problem. We're expanding. The building next door is for sale. I thought we might discuss it over lunch." This was my life now. Meetings with lawyers, decisions about investments, discussions about which causes deserved funding. It was exhausting in a completely different way than my old life had been, but it was mine. Every choice was mine. Olivia found me as the crowd dispersed. She was wearing a blazer I didn't recognize, her hair cut shorter than I'd ever seen it. She looked like a professional. She looked like someone who had somewhere to be. "The catering company wants to know if they should pack up," she said. "And there's a reporter from the Courier-Journal who wants an interview. Tell them both to wait." I steered her away from the crowd, toward a quiet corner near the stairwell. "How are you doing?" "Busy. The scholarship committee meets tomorrow, and we're still sorting through applications. There are so many women who need help, Mom. I had no idea. Neither did I. For a long time." She looked at me with an expression I was still getting used to. Pride. My daughter was proud of me. "Dad called again," she said. "Left a voicemail. He wants to meet." "What did he say?" "The usual, that he made a mistake, that he misses the family, that Melissa left him." She shrugged. "She left him about 6 weeks after the divorce. Turns out she wasn't interested in a man with a mortgage and no prospects." I should have felt satisfaction. I didn't. I just felt tired. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to hear him out. He's still my father." "He is, and he always will be." "But that doesn't mean you owe him anything." Olivia nodded. "I told him I'd think about it. That's all I can do right now." We walked back into the lobby, where the photographer was arranging people for a group shot. Helen waved me over. The reporter from the Courier-Journal had her notebook ready. Someone handed me a glass of sparkling water I didn't ask for. This was my life now. Public and purposeful and sometimes overwhelming. But also free. Completely, entirely free. That evening, after the last handshake and the last photo, I drove to Dorothy's apartment. I'd kept it, paid the rent, left everything exactly as she'd arranged it. The velvet armchair, the bookshelf, the crossword puzzles still stacked on the side table. I sat in her chair and looked out the window at the same view she'd looked at for 40 years. The lights of St. Matthew's blinking on and off, the cars moving along Shelbyville Road, the ordinary world going about its ordinary business. My phone buzzed. A text from Keith. "Nancy, please. I need to talk to you. I know I made mistakes. I was stupid and selfish, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Can we meet? Just coffee, just to talk." I read the message twice. Then I typed my response. "I forgive you, Keith. Not for your sake, but for mine. I spent too many years carrying anger, and I'm done with it now. But we have nothing left to say to each other. The life you wanted is the life you have. I hope you find peace with it." I pressed send and set down the phone. The apartment was quiet. No television, no radio, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I picked up one of Dorothy's crossword puzzles, half finished, the pen still tucked into the spine. 7 across. What you give when you have nothing left to lose. 8 letters. I counted on my fingers. Thought about Dorothy, alone in this apartment with her millions, choosing to live simply because she'd learned that happiness didn't come from things. Thought about Keith, who'd spent his whole life chasing money and ended up with nothing. Thought about myself, standing in a cemetery 3 months ago, holding divorce papers and believing my life was over. 8 letters. I wrote them in carefully, in Dorothy's handwriting style, the way she'd taught me years ago. Kindness. That was Dorothy's answer to everything. Not revenge, not anger, not the satisfaction of watching Keith realize what he'd lost. Just kindness. Simple, stubborn, relentless kindness. I finished the puzzle and set it aside. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the board of the foundation. We'd discuss the expansion, the new programs, the hundreds of applications from women who needed help. I'd make decisions that affected real lives, and I'd try to make Dorothy proud. But tonight, I sat in her chair and watched the lights of the city blink on and off. I thought about the girl I'd been at 26, so sure that marrying Keith Powell was the smartest thing I'd ever do. I thought about the woman I'd become at 58, standing in a courtroom with a bank statement in my hand and a whole new life ahead of me. Keith had called me a burden. He'd said he needed a rich wife. He'd thrown divorce papers on my aunt's grave and driven away without looking back. He was right about one thing. He did need a rich wife. He just didn't know he already had one. I smiled in the dark apartment, alone but not lonely, free in a way I'd never imagined possible. The 9-digit balance in my bank account meant nothing compared to this. The knowledge that I had finally stopped living for someone else's approval. Dorothy had given me more than money. She'd given me permission to be myself. And that, in the end, was worth more than $500 million. I locked up the apartment and drove home through the quiet Louisville streets. My home now, a condo downtown with a view of the river and no memories of Keith Powell anywhere in it. Olivia was meeting me for breakfast tomorrow. The foundation board was meeting after that. Life was busy and complicated and sometimes exhausting. But it was mine. Every decision, every mistake, every triumph, mine. I pulled into the parking garage and sat for a moment in the dark. Outside, the city hummed with 10,000 lives being lived. Somewhere out there, Keith was alone in his house, realizing that the furniture he'd stolen didn't make him happy. Somewhere, Melissa was moving on to her next target. Somewhere, women were walking into the Dorothy Foster Community Center, looking for shelter, looking for hope. I got out of the car and walked toward the elevator. My heels echoed on the concrete. My keys jingled in my hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to do something meaningful with the fortune I'd never expected. But tonight, I was just Nancy Foster, 58 years old, finally learning what it meant to live. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.